Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the Stellenbosch University Forum Lecture. Apologies from my side for somewhat trying to shift our day 1 hour on. Somewhere in the world it is 2 o'clock, but here it's 1 o'clock, and it's the start of our forum lecture for today by Dr. Natalia Flores-Quiroz. I'm not sure if I pronounce your surname correctly, Natalia, but you can
It's okay, no problem.
Okay. So just a little bit of background from my side. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Turina Teran. I manage the Division for Research Development, and we coordinate these Stellenbosch University Forum Lectures. So the Forum Lecture series was already started since 1990, and it provides regular opportunities to staff and students at Stellenbosch University, as well as the general public, to learn more about the impactful and relevant research that's being done at the university. So we normally request our Stellenbosch Forum lecturers to present their academic research topics in such a way that it's understandable also for non-experts in the field. And these lectures therefore provide an ideal opportunity for questions and critical debate and interesting discussions across disciplinary boundaries. So our theme that we chose for this year, in consultation with the Stellenbosch University Forum Lecture Committee, a small committee that we formed to help us to choose topics, was changing climates. So we chose this topic as we know that our world currently is and continues to be in a state of flux. So changing climates affects all sectors of society already in the present, and the pace of change will likely accelerate in the future. That will influence lives in a number of ways. So our response as a research-intensive university to these challenges really requires cutting-edge research and innovation and interventions. And through the series of talks, we really want to focus on some of the research that we do as part of our attempts to address changing climates. So the lecture series involve the influences of changing environments, not only on natural resources or the natural environment, but also on health, education, history and economies, and how research can be impactful in finding solutions in such rapidly changing settings. So our Stellenbosch University Forum lecture for today, Natalia, will tell you about climate change and the need to learn to live with fire. And I'm looking forward to this. I know about this group's work, and it's always very, very interesting to engage with that, and so easy to see how applicable it is in today's the societal challenges that we face. So Natalia, I was very happy to see that you are a postdoctoral fellow. And Mareike will have to correct me, but I'm not sure that we've had many postdocs presenting at the Stellenbosch Forum lecture. And I'm really pleased about that, because we do regard at Stellenbosch University our postdocs as an absolutely integral and critical and pivotal part of our research effort. So Natalia is a postdoc in the Fire Engineering Research Unit at Stellenbosch. She holds an MSc in Fire Safety Engineering from Ghent, and she was a consulting fire engineer working on mining projects in Chile prior to joining academia. So the rest of your bio, I believe, was shared with the colleagues attending, Natalia. So without any further ado, I'm going to give over to you. And people must please feel free. Well, first of all, please switch off your own microphone and camera, but please feel free to post your questions throughout the presentation in the chat box. I will be able to read them, but also feel free to eventually just speak, put your microphone on and speak and ask questions afterwards. Thanks, Natalia. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen now. Okay. You can see my screen, right?
Yes, we can see it. Thanks.
Okay, that's great. Well, good day, and thanks everyone that is joining us today. I am Natalia Flores-Quiroz. I'm a fire safety engineer, and I'm a part of the fire research unit at Stellenbosch University. Today, I'm going to be talking about climate change and the need to live with fire. Through the reconstruction or an analysis of the 2017 Knysna fires, we will learn more about wildland-urban interface fires. First, I will present some concepts necessary to understand the complexity of this type of fires. And then we will see the case study, and we will finish with some recommendations to improve fire safety. And as a side note, I would like to thank Vulcan Wildfire Management for allowing me to use their pictures and videos in this presentation. So the wildland-urban interface, also known as WUI, is the area where wildland vegetation meets or mixes with humans and their development, including houses and infrastructure. The image on the back corresponds to Knysna, and we can see that it kind of fits this definition, right? But we need a bit more numbers to see if a certain area would really could be really classified as WUI. So here we have a definition that is used in the US, and it's widely used on WUI fire risk research. So there's a minimum housing requirement of at least one structure per 16 hectares, and a minimum requirement of at least 50% coverage vegetation, or if it's less than 50%, it has to be within 2.4 kilometers of a densely vegetated area. And just keep in mind that this definition can change from country to country, and these 2.4 kilometers sometimes are 100 meters. For instance, in Europe, sometimes they use 100 meters, okay? So what is a WUI fire? Any non-structured fire that occurs in vegetation is defined as a wildland fire. A wildland fire could start due to a natural ignition, such as lighting, or due to accidental or malicious human actions. When a wildland fire reaches wildland-urban interface areas, the effect on communities can be catastrophic. And I think by now we are sort of used to seeing these images of people desperately trying to evacuate the affected area. WUI fires create conditions that can overwhelm the response capabilities, resulting in loss of human life, loss of property, and large economic losses. And just in case you're wondering how often South Africa experienced these type of fires, here's a list of some of the WUI fires that have occurred in the last 7 years. I think you might remember that last month we had the Helderberg fire, and last year we had the Table Mountain fire that received a lot of attention because it reached UCT, burning down its library, and many students had to evacuate the residents, right? And the one that we're talking today, it's the 2017 Knysna fire that it's almost at the end. And we can visualize the impact of WUI fires in this table. Here we have fires from different countries in the world, and we can see several similarities. We can see here that usually there are multiple casualties, either fatalities or people injured. There are also many structures that are affected, either destroyed or damaged. Thousands of people need to be evacuated, and a large area gets affected. And we also have large economic losses associated to these fires. So we saw that WUI fires involve a wildland fire reaching an urban area. So now we're going to review some of the fundamentals of wildland fires and how homes burn to be able to understand the WUI fire risk. Here we have two triangles, one the fire triangle, the second the wildland fire behavior triangle. So in order to have fire, we need three components: fuel, oxygen, and heat. If we think of a wildland fire, the fuel would be the vegetation. We would have unlimited access to oxygen, and the heat could come from a natural or a human-related ignition. On the other hand, we have this triangle that influences the behavior of fire. That means how is it going to spread, how fast, the flame lengths, etc. And that depends on the type of fuel. So in this case, the type of vegetation, the weather conditions, and the topography. And I'm going to go a bit deep on this triangle. So first, I'm going to talk about the fuels. And there are many ways to describe fuels. We can talk about them with regards of their size and shapes, like here. For instance, we have heavy fuels or light fuels. And heavy fuels would be harder to ignite, but once they are on fire, it would be harder to extinguish. And the other way around for light fuels. We have also the arrangement. In this image, you can see a loose arrangement of fuel, and this would provoke a slow fire spread. While in here, we have a continuous supply of fuel that allows for the fire to spread easily. Another factor is the moisture content, and this impacts the flammability of the fuel. It makes it easier or harder to burn. And the moisture content can vary a lot depending on the weather conditions. And finally, we have the chemical composition, and vegetation can contain natural oils in their leaves. For instance, here we have a picture of our eucalyptus that has oil in their leaves, and that's why they burn so intensely. The weather conditions also impact the fire behavior, and the main challenge is that they are often changing, as we're going to see in this video. Please note that here on the bottom, the video has a timestamp, and also it's going to provide some information about the weather conditions. Okay. So the video starts around 8 in the morning. The temperature is 18 degrees, and the wind speed is 13 kilometers, a humidity of 88%. And we can see that it was kind of manageable. By 11, 20 degrees, 7 kilometers and per hour, and 83% of humidity. And we can see more smoke production, and it looks like the fire is getting bigger. The weather conditions that influence the fire are the temperature, the wind, the relative humidity, precipitation, cloud development, and they also influence drought. And we can see here that using some of these factors, we can determine the fire danger index. Okay, now if we look at the video, we see a lot of smoke, and I think by now it's like 12 o'clock. So by 12 we see large smoke. Yeah, 12. Large smoke plumes. We can see some turbulence here. There are some whirlwinds. And the fire looks completely different from what it did at the beginning of the video. It is quickly spreading. Its intensity has increased considerably, and this change in fire behavior can be attributed to the change of weather conditions. Topography also plays an important role in the way the fire spreads across the landscape. The topographic features create dynamic environment for the fire spread. And some of the most known topographic features are the valleys, the chimneys, the ridges, and the saddles. The topographic characteristics, such as aspect, also affects the conditions of the fuel. For example, a south-facing slope, here in the south hemisphere at least, receives less sunlight, so it retains more moisture, and it's colder and more humid than the north-facing slope, supporting vegetation with higher moisture content. The slope is also very important. An uphill fire, that means that the fire is spread. That means that the fire is spreading this way up. Can burn faster than a downhill fire. Usually it is like that. And I say usually because we have to remember that in a wildland fire, we have these three components interacting. So we could have a fast downhill fire if we have enough wind pushing the fire down. Okay. People often think that the fire is more dangerous when it's spreading outwards, but when it's spreading downwards, we should be aware of embers that can fly from here and reach to other areas, creating secondary fires. And during the fire, there are several processes happening. First, we have the drying and thermal degradation of the fuel. Here on the flame part, we have combustion and smoke generation. And then we have the plume rise and the smoke transport. Okay, so now that we know the fundamentals of wildland fire behavior, let's look at some statistics. This graph shows the number of ignitions in Table Mountain National Park between 1998 and 2018. And we can see that it has increased in the last years. Below, we have a graph from the European Union showing that the number of forest fires has increased dramatically this year. And I think we all heard about it in the news. We know what's happening there. But the number of fires itself doesn't say much. Another important data is the area burned. And this graph shows the area burned during wildland fires in California, that the area burned in California has increased a lot in the last 10 years, you can see here. Okay, so now we can wonder, why is the number of wildland fires increasing? And there are two factors that we could point out. One is climate change. We know that climate change produces higher temperatures, drought, low humidity, strong winds. And as we saw before, all of these factors influence the fuel conditions, making it drier. This means that the vegetation will be easier to ignite. And it will also enhance the fire spread. These factors also have an impact on the fire seasons, making it last for longer. On the other hand, the land use is also changing. Nowadays, more people are living in the we. This means that there will be more sources of ignitions due to human actions. The presence of people in the we also affects the ways that wildfires are approached. For instance, fires that maybe before wouldn't be extinguished now have to be extinguished due to the dangerous situation they present to people living in the we. And this produces a buildup of the available fuel. Also, there are areas that are being used for plantations, and we have alien species like pine or eucalyptus. This has an impact on the available fuel, and it increases the fire spread. Because plantations usually burn faster and with more intensity than, let's say, indigenous forest. And the alien vegetation also has an impact in fire regimes. Okay, and now we need to understand how homes burn. There are three main ways in which the fire spreads from the wildland to a house. The first is through uninterrupted vegetation. This means that there's a continuous path between the forest and the house, that it has vegetation, so the fires can spread until it reaches vegetation that is surrounding the house. The second one, in case we don't have a continuous path of vegetation, can be through radiation or embers, usually embers. So these embers can fly and reach either vegetation surrounding the house or igniting the structure directly if our home is made out of timber, or if our gutters have leaves, or maybe even if our window is open. And then we have structure to structure, that is when a house is already ignited, the fire starts spreading to adjacent homes. And I would like to talk a bit about the challenges of wildfires. First, we have the evacuation, and wildfire evacuations tend to come with very short notice and very limited information. Due to the impact of weather condition on the fire behavior, this type of fires can be very unpredictable, and the fire behavior can rapidly change, creating dangerous situations. Also, many weak communities don't have the infrastructure required to evacuate safely. Sometimes there's only one road to access and to exit the place. Additionally, evacuations not only involve people, but pets and livestock, which make the situation much more complicated. Then we have critical infrastructure, and this challenge is more related to the consequences associated to wildfires. So this type of fires can damage critical infrastructure or interrupt critical services. This not only has an impact during the fire, where maybe we can be affected by power outages or loss of communication that could maybe affect our evacuation process, but critical infrastructure and services could be out of operation for months or even years, impacting the community for a long time. Then we have communications, and communications are critical during wildfires. On one hand, we usually have different fire brigades working together in order to be able to control the fire. Often there is no communication between the different organizations, or there's not only one fire management authority, and that can create a bit of confusion. And on the other hand, we have the community that is looking for answers, like what's happening, should we evacuate, where should we go? And formal information usually takes a long time to arrive. The last challenge that I would like to talk about is the spot fires. And I already mentioned it before, but spot fires occur when embers, that can also be called firebrands, are carried by winds or by the smoke column out of the area of fire into fuels that haven't been burned yet. Long-range spotting has been observed in WUI fires, with embers flying for more than 2 kilometers and causing independent fires. And this has a huge impact on the fire spread rate. Okay, and so now I'm going to show you the findings of our paper, Analysis of Homes and Structures Damaged or Destroyed in the 2017 Knysna Fires Disaster, which is under review. And the main focus of this work was to try to identify what determines home survivability. Here are the weather conditions during the Knysna fire. And we can see that they are changing throughout the incident. However, strong winds above 65 kilometers per hour, high temperatures above 30 degrees, low humidity below 20% were registered. Under these conditions, the fire danger would be extreme. Additionally, by mid-2017, there was a severe drought conditions in this area. So we can also see that we have some data missing here and over here. But what is interesting here is that we see a change on the wind direction. First, we had the wind coming from the west, and here it changes and it's coming from the east. Okay, that would be important for our analysis. So all of these conditions together will have an impact on the fuel, making it drier. That means that ignitions would be more likely to occur. And well, and the strong winds would have a direct impact on the fire spread rate. So the first step was to understand the general fire spread. And these figures show the timeline of the fire between June 7 and June 10th. So on the morning of June 7, 2 independent fires started in the early morning. We have one at 3 a.m. and the other one at 5. And they spread following the wind direction that was here, going to this side. We can see here that the fire jumped roads, that it jumped this river, but it also had this very important jump here, right? 2.8 kilometers. And it jumped over an indigenous forest. This is not something unexpected, as large fires jumps like this one have been seen in other fires. But this situation allows us to reflect in two important things. One is the definition of the WUI. We saw at the beginning that there was a distance of 2.4 kilometers, but I also mentioned that this distance was reduced even to 100 meters. So if we consider that we could have fire jumps of this magnitude, it makes sense to consider 2.4 kilometers as in our definition. It would make it more safe, more conservative. On the other hand, it makes us think about the impact of the vegetation. This is a close-up of this area, and this is a southern Afro-temperate forest, which has been described as fire-resistant. And I'm going to talk about this image, but I just want to point out that it's not part of our research, and here you can find the reference, but this is very interesting. So in this close-up, we can see that the fire scar was here. And then with these yellow arrows, this represents spot fires that didn't develop due to the low flammability of this vegetation. However, when the brands reach this part where the pink arrow is, where there was a pine plantation, another secondary fire started, and the fire kept spreading. Now we can see the importance of the type of vegetation in the fire spread, and this can be defined as a green fire break. Okay, this is the same day, but in the afternoon. So around 1, another fire started here, and we can see another big jump, 800 meters above a water body. And the fire kept spreading in this direction. And another thing that we can see here is that the fire barely affected this area. That was very interesting. But we are going to discuss more about this in a few minutes. This showed the fires the following days. We have from the 8th till the 10th. And we see that if you remember at this point of time, the wind direction changed. So we can see that the fire spread also changed to this direction. Now it's going to the west. And something very interesting happened here related with evacuation. And so what happened here is that people that were in this location, they couldn't escape through the roads because the roads were blocked or cut, or there was something happening with the roads. So they had to use this beach to go to Buffalo's Bay, okay? So as I mentioned, people had to evacuate towards Buffalo's Bay via this beach, and it's like 5 kilometers beach. As you can see in this picture, some people were walking, other people were transported by 4x4 cars. And this procedure lasts during, I think it was done during the 7th and the 8th of June. However, when the winds changed, the fire reached Buffalo's Bay. So people had to evacuate through the other side, again using the beach. So this clearly shows the challenges when evacuating during a wildfire. Here, it's a brief summary of the impacts that this fire had. It can be seen that most of the area burned corresponds to wildland. We see that only less than 10% of the area affected corresponds to indigenous forest. And around 6% correspond to urban areas. But even it was just a small percentage, we see that it had a big impact with 8 fatalities, more than 1,400 homes burned, and more than 10,000 people being displaced. Okay, so now we get to the main focus of our research, and that was where we tried to identify what determines if a house gets burned or not. And for that, we did a more detailed analysis, and we just focused on 3 small areas that had very different outcomes when it came to home survivability. So if you see here, these red dots represent houses that were destroyed by the fire. Okay, so if we look at area number 1, we see a lot of houses affected. Then in area number 2, not so many. And area number 3 is the one that we talked about before, and that had barely, like it was almost not impact. Like we have 2 houses here, and I think 1 over here that we can see. So the factors that we consider for this analysis were fire barriers, topography, vegetation, and construction materials. Okay, so this is our first area. And we see here that there were some 8 meters wide roads. There were here some limited vegetation zone that had like 30 meters wide. And from what we see here, it looks like they weren't very effective on containing the fire spread. But I think we need a bit more context in order to understand what happened in this area. So we introduced topography. These are elevation lines here and here. And we can see that the topography was changing. We have houses that are going to be located uphill, where the fire was burning uphill, if you consider this fire spread. And the houses located in the area where the fire was spreading uphill would have experienced a very intense fire, right? So it makes sense that so many houses were affected here. And then when we reach here and we have like a downhill slope, we can see that not that many houses were affected here, but we see, and I think maybe we can see it better in the previous image, that there are a lot of houses that were far away from the main fire, because we have the fire scar here, that were affected, and that can be attributed to embers. So we can observe what we said, that when we have the fire spreading downhill, embers can fly and reach houses that are farther. Oh, sorry. Now for the second area, we see this road, 8 meters wide, and it looks like it was very effective, right? And we could wonder, is this 8 meters wide? Is not that wide, so why did it have so much effect on this area? And then we can also think about the topography. And this fire was spreading downslope, which means that it was a bit slower. Also, we know from interviews and testimonies of people that in this area there was a very active firefighting of the fire. And if we look at the location of the houses that were burned, it also makes us believe that they were ignited by embers. Okay. Then for the third area, we see here this agricultural land that could have acted like a fire barrier. You can also see that this terrain is more flat. And what it's very important too is that the fire reached this area at 7 in the afternoon. So probably the weather conditions were much better. I don't have the data because as I showed you before, that data is missing, but it makes sense that at 7 the temperature dropped, the moisture content was higher. The humidity was higher. So maybe the conditions here also made that the fire wasn't so intense. And then we analyzed the vegetation. And we checked for 3 things. How healthy was the vegetation? And for that, we analyzed the normalized difference vegetation index. And the closer to 1, it indicates that the vegetation is very healthy. And the closer to 0, it means that maybe there's no vegetation. We also analyzed the water content. And for that, we analyzed the normalized difference water index. And the closer to 1, the higher the water content. And lastly, we check for alien vegetation. And here our map shows the average density of alien vegetation in these areas. Okay, so if we focus on area 1 and 2, we can see that the indexes, the values are kind of similar for how healthy is the vegetation and for the water content too. And the only thing that changes a bit is the presence of alien vegetation. Like in here, we see very little here, but here in this area, there are more in the surroundings. So maybe that could have have an impact too. Now, if we focus on the third area, we see that the vegetation indices are low, but that can be related to the fact that there wasn't a lot of vegetation in this area. And if we check for the alien vegetation, we see that there was a lot, but on the back of the area, if we consider the fire spread like this. So it didn't have had an impact on this region. And lastly, we check for the construction materials. And it was difficult to access to accurate data for these 3 regions that I was talking about. So we had to work in even smaller areas within the regions. So in here in this table, we see that we analyze the wall type, and we have masonry, timber, or unknown. A lot of times we didn't know what was the material. And then we have the roof type, and we have steel sheeting, thatch, tiles, and undetermined. And we see that we can see some trends here, and that timber houses were more affected. And the thatch and tiles roofs also were more affected in this area and in this one too. And I guess this makes sense, especially if, for instance, now in these pictures, we can see how a fire can start igniting wooden material like these doors and like these stairs. So our conclusion is that timber houses are more at risk, and thatch and tiles roofs too. So there are other factors that can influence the outcome. So one is fire intensity. The other is the weather conditions, the firefighting activities, and housekeeping. As I mentioned before, maybe we didn't have vegetation surrounding our house, and our house wasn't made out of combustible material, but maybe our gutters were full of leaves. Or yeah, or like what I said before, a window was open and an ember got to the curtain. So there's so many things happening in this type of fires that it's difficult to have accurate information. So we never know the whole story, and there are a lot of uncertainties in this type of analysis. Okay, and so now some recommendations. The main recommendation is to create a defensible space. And in order to do that, you can follow these guidelines. There's the red zone, where you shouldn't have any vegetation or flammable materials. That's from 0 to 3 meters. Then we have the orange zone, where there should be a reduced amount of vegetation, and then the yellow zone, where you can have more vegetation. And we can see here the impact that this can have on a fire. So everything around burned, but these houses are still standing there. Other recommendations are to understand the fire risk, and hopefully by now you understand it a bit better. To stay informed about the weather conditions and check the fire danger and act accordingly. Also have a plan. So if you're going to evacuate, do it soon, before the roads are affected, before the traffic jams. I don't know if you remember from the first video, the conditions when you are evacuating in your car are not the best. You have very little visibility. You have the heat from the flames. So a lot of accidents have been recorded while people are evacuating. And then if you're going to stay and defend your house, you need to have the equipment necessary and have a plan B in case the conditions become critical. And our friends from Vulcan, they have prepared these flyers with a lot of information. So if you want to check it out, you can go to this website and find out more ways to prevent wildfires and to minimize the consequences. Okay, and as a summary, we saw that the number of wildfires are increasing due to climate change and the land use change. And in order to understand home survivability, we need to analyze all the factors that intervene in the final outcome. Also, although there are many factors that are out of our control, there are measures that we can take to minimize the wildfire impact. And we also saw that the analysis of real incidents can provide valuable information to understand fire risk. That was my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalia. It's really, really interesting. And I guess it's nice to see, well, nice and horrific in a way to see an example so close to home that we can all clearly remember, and certainly more recent examples also where people have lost lives and properties in these fires. So great work that you are doing to understand that. So I want to open up the floor for any questions from the audience. Perhaps a first question from my side. I haven't been to Knysna for a long time, so I don't know what happened post this event. Do you think that people have taken advice in terms of rebuilding, because or has many people just simply rebuilt their homes after this event, or was there some interventions that will now prevent this from happening again in that area?
So I don't know specifically what happened after Knysna, but what I know is that people's perception about fire risk, especially wildland fire risk, is that it's out of their control. So there's nothing you can do. It's so unpredictable that they think there's nothing they can do, and that if you want to live in these areas, it's a risk that you are willing to take. A lot of people would say, I didn't come to Knysna to live and to come here and just cut all the trees, right? So it's a risk that they are willing to take, so to say. Also, after a wildland fire, where this amount of vegetation is burned, it kind of creates a safety environment, or you think you are more safe because there was a fire now, so probably there won't be a fire in the next, I don't know, 5 or 10 years. But yeah, that's what usually happens. It's difficult to implement these measures, to be honest.
Thanks very much. I see there are 2 hands, so I'm going to give Bekan Chilkeba a chance to ask a question. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Natalia. It's very interesting and it's very important title, of course, that you are trying to correlating climate change with fire. Of course, climate change may handle the major percentage in causing fire. But what my question is that, do you think that making a distance in between vegetation cover or fuels and homes or infrastructure is better preventing the cause of firing, or fundamentally solving the problem of climate change that may cause firing?
So if I understood correctly, you are asking if this kind of measure of creating the defensible space, it's a good solution, or if we should maybe go to try to fix climate change or diminish the number of ignitions? Is that the question?
Exactly. What I mean is that climate change is, of course, the climate change is most probably causing the firing, because fire is an emergency. We don't know when the fire is occurring due to a certain condition, indeed. But that at the final of your summary, your presentation, you try to recommend that it's better to making certain distance in between the infrastructures, that house or roads or any infrastructure that are very susceptible to the firing should be develop certain distance in order to minimizing the risk of the fire. Yeah. But of course, that is the best measurement, or it is an alert for the people who want to defend themselves from the risk of that fire. But in general, when we say the fire is caused due to climate change, exactly, even I'm not exactly now, but scientists say that temperature is increasing.
Yes.
In this 21st century proportionally, which is it's increased. We don't know about the magnitude of precipitation and moisture content, but temperature is already approved by scientists that it is increasing. So this increasing of temperature is lead to cause, of course, probably even not 100% it may cause firing indeed. Therefore, so world community, I think, so even I don't know, I just identify that the scope of area, stereo of area in South, I think South Africa, but worldwide this is a problem. If you see that in last year, in this year, it is caused in Australia, in United States, firing is still risking the world. So so my question is that, so do you hierarchy climate change is best management of fire risk?
Of course,
or what is
if we could do something about climate change quickly, yeah, of course, that would be much better. And also we could think of ways like, why are you talking about these measures creating a defensible space instead of talking about preventing fires, like for instance, preventing ignitions? But for instance, in this fire, we just know the cause of one of the 3 fires. So there's a lack of information regarding fire cause, so we cannot really tackle the main problem of fire causes. And there's such a variety of causes that it's impossible. So for these type of fires, I think that would be the best recommendation. It's not gonna make a difference in the number of fires. It's not gonna make a difference in the area that burns, but maybe it would make a difference in your house. I know it's not the best, but yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Natalia. Dr. Eugene, I see your hand. Please go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for this presentation, Dr. Flores-Quiroz. My question is, when we're thinking about the comparison between fires that take place in California and South Africa, what would you think are the commonalities that can be drawn between those cases of fires? Would you say that it's a combination, or it could be attributed to a combination of man-made versus natural disasters, or does one take over the other more so?
So when you're talking about fires, it's a combination of both. If you had just the wildland fire, yeah, it would be bad for the vegetation. Well, some vegetation needs to burn, so maybe it's not bad, but you are producing, I don't know, you are creating smoke, and it could be bad for the environment. But it's completely different when you have people involved. So if you think of California or what happened here in South Africa, I would say they are very similar. They are both being affected by the weather conditions. And what would change would be the vegetation. I think that's what it's most different between different countries, is the type of vegetation, probably the landscape, and then maybe how people build their houses, what materials they use, and culture differences if you go to that side. But it would be very similar between different fires around the world. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Vian, I see your hand, so please go ahead, and then I'll go to the chat box. Thanks.
Thank you. And yeah, thanks so much, Natalia. That was really insightful. I just want to ask 2 quick questions. I think that irrigated, like agricultural land, was really interesting to see that it didn't spread over there, and just kind of relating to that, the wetness index, is there certain almost like trends or kind of indicators that you, or like indexes that you saw that kind of had really big effect on the spread of the fire, like kind of what that wetness index is? Mm-hmm. And just in your kind of definition and how you think about a fire break, are the fire breaks for kind of avoiding the spread of fires, or is it more accessibility for firefighters and the staff? Because I know there's a lot of confusion around that for people.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you.
So one thing, it's a fire break that it's meant to as a fire break, and other things are fire barriers that could be roads or rivers. Okay, both of them can work. Yes, if the fire is not very intense. I think under the conditions that we had in the Knysna fire, it's very difficult. We saw embers jumping 2.8 kilometers. There's no fire break that's gonna be useful for stopping this type of fire. But yeah, they can be used for firefighting, for providing a space where they can arrive and they can protect themselves and try to control the fire. So I would say that that's the main use. Of course, it's going to depend on the fire intensity, but when we have this, there's nothing much you can do to stop the fire. And with regards of the water content, yeah, I think that's also what we saw in this forest that acted like a green fire break, they're called. So yes, the more moisture, the less probability of ignition, or the harder it is to ignite. So that can also be used as a fire barrier.
Thank you so much for that.
Thanks, Natalia. There's a question from Professor Karen Essler in the chat box, which I will just read to you. Interested to know more. She's interested to know more about your NDVI measurements. Now, I hope you know what that means. Indicating vegetation health. How did this relate to forest versus fynbos or alien vegetation? Or did you cross-tabulate since you had an alien vegetation map too? Also, what are your thoughts on fire breaks? So I think you've mentioned the fire breaks, the challenge, and she's asking, are these a waste of time given how easily fires jump?
Definitely not a waste of time, no. But yeah, we see that under these extreme weather conditions, they will serve another purpose, not to contain the fire, but they are useful still. Yeah, we didn't correlate. We just saw analyze them independently, each factor. So the health and the water content and the alien density, and then we just analyzed all together. But we didn't we didn't have anything that would be able to correlate them.
Thanks very much, Natalia. There's another question or comment from the chat box. Somebody Berger, sorry, I don't know the first name. I might have missed this. He or she says, but why do fires burn more quickly uphill compared to downhill? Is it because the fire is closer to the ground and thus having more fuel available going up versus going down? Okay, so if you think of a fire, the smoke plume raises, right? And it raises due to buoyancy because the hotter gas are less dense than the cold air, so it rises up. So even if you have a candle and you move your hand around it, you will see that if you put it on top, you will get more heat. Okay, so when you're going down flat, in a flat surface, your fire would be spreading like this, and you would have the conventional heat going upwards. When you're going like this, your flame tilts, and the flame gets closer to the ground. So radiation, it's more transmitted, yeah. And also this convectional heat from the smoke plume, it creates that you are drying your combustible material faster when the flame is tilted through this to this side, okay? And yeah, and the worst condition is going upward, like if you think how a fire spreads through a curtain. So it spreads very fast going up, but it doesn't spread very fast if you have like an horizontal movement. And if you think going down, it's also the same because the buoyancy, it's driven upwards. So the way that the materials get preheated when the fire is moving down, it's much lower. So that's why. Okay, thanks. I think that was an excellent explanation. Vian, I see your hand again. Please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, just been thinking now since Natalia's latest answer. Just curious, so you're saying like the fire break is kind of related to the fire intensity, and obviously the fire intensity would be kind of determined on the vegetation density around it. So would it then be more or less like relevant or kind of needed for fire break if there's dense? Because obviously if it's dense, then it's easier to spread, but do you actually then need the firefighters to be able to access that area more? I don't know if it makes sense, but basically is it, if there's dense bush around it or vegetation, is a fire break then more or less effective? Because it obviously can spread easier, but we also need the firefighters in there.
Yeah, so this is a question that we get all the time, like how big should be my fire break in order to be protected, and it's something that I cannot say. And yeah, it's difficult because as we saw, the fires can be very different and depends on so many factors. So now you're talking about like how dense it is, but it's also important, for instance, the height of the vegetation, because your flames would be related to the height of the vegetation. It would be related to the oil content. So for instance, I mentioned this distance between that it was 2.4 kilometers in determining the WE. It varies a lot, and there's research that defines this distance depending on the type of vegetation, and it goes from 800 meters to 3.2 kilometers. That would mean that they say, okay, this vegetation can create embers that are able to travel 3.2 kilometers. So it would depend on a lot of factors, of a lot of the conditions of the vegetation. But it's something that I just can't. I can't be able to say 1 meter, 2 meters. Like no.
Yeah. I mean, like more is it like if there's a high risk of it spreading with wind, like the embers, then is that almost the case where the fire break is not as efficient?
Yeah, the embers can be one. It's the main factor. So then you would have to ask yourself, what is the ember capability of certain type of vegetation? And for that, we need to test the vegetation. I think it hasn't been done here yet. From what I've seen, I'm not sure, and it's kind of a difficult thing to estimate.
And that's a really hard and broad question.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you so much. It was really insightful.
Thanks, Natalia. Maybe one last question from my side, because I see our time is running out. I was wondering, you mentioned that there aren't really differences between the fires in California and what we've now seen in Europe and the South African examples. Are there big differences in the technology in firefighting that you know of? I mean, are there international techniques that are much more, have become much more advanced that we perhaps lagging behind in? Or I know that's not your area of focus, but interesting to know if you know about anything.
Not that I know of. If you see movies about firefighters in the US, which would be like what I would expect for them to have the best technology, they are still fighting fires with these beaters, which is, I don't know if you know, but it's this thing that tries to suffocate the fire. So we're just hitting the fire, which it's not very technological. So I guess if they are still using that, it's because there's, yeah. You have to think that these wildland fires usually are located up the mountains. You don't have water sources around. The firefighters, they have to hike to get to the fire, so they can't carry hoses or a lot of water. So yeah, the approach of wildland firefighters is very different from structurals, where they can have a pump and these huge hoses. So it makes things more complicated, but not that I'm aware of. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Matthew, the last question to you. I see your hand. Please go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, it's more of a comment just on the last question about firefighting that you asked, and I think the general techniques in terms of using helicopters and that is fairly standard around the world. The one that stands out is the lack of using backburns, and in South Africa, especially in the Western Cape, we're very scared to use backburns. It's I don't know why that's the case, but it's definitely an effective way to fight fires, and it's something that I think people should be doing more of. Just a comment.
When you refer to backburns, is it during the fire?
Yeah, so a backburn ahead of the ahead of the
to create like a fire break.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's something used a lot in grass fires. Don't know why it's not used in fynbos fires.
Thanks very much, Matthew. Any last quick comment from your side, Natalia?
No, not really. Just to thank for the opportunity of presenting my work here, and I hope that it was useful. Yeah.
It was certainly very, very interesting. Thank you so much to you for the time. I know this is it takes some time from people, and thank you very much for the work that you do within your group, which is really impressive, and which we keep an eye on. And yeah, just thank you very much for everybody attending. It's always good to see good numbers coming up for the Stellenbosch University Forum lectures. It illustrates people's interest in our research and the impact that it has. So thank you very much, everyone, and please keep an eye out for our next lecture. We always communicate the dates well in advance. Thanks, Natalia. Thank you so much for coming on. Keep well, everybody.